Rain fell in slow, deliberate drops against the concrete courtyard of Fort Grayson Academy, each impact echoing off the steel helmets and pressed uniforms of the cadets standing in formation. The storm had rolled in from nowhere, dark clouds smothering the sun like a shroud, wind tugging at flags that refused to surrender. Beneath that bruised sky stood Commander Alina Drake, hands clasped behind her back, posture steady as iron. Her uniform was plain, unadorned except for a single worn insignia, a silent reminder of the wars she never spoke about. The air was thick with tension. Across from her, a line of cadets whispered, their arrogance sharp enough to cut through the drizzle. They had been warned she was different, that her past wasn't one of drills and handbooks, but of black ops and silence. But youth rarely believes in ghosts until they see one standing in front of them. One cadet, taller than the rest, took a step forward. His name was Bryce Keller. Barely 20, his eyes glinting with the cocky defiance of a boy who thought authority was a game. He spat on the wet pavement, the sound breaking the silence like a gunshot. "You think you can talk to us like soldiers?" he muttered, voice low but loud enough for others to hear. "You're just here to make us march straight and stand tall." Alina's gaze didn't shift. She had seen this before. Every base, every classroom, every new batch of young men desperate to prove they were lions. They didn't know that real lions didn't roar. Then the unthinkable happened. Bryce, emboldened by the smirks of his peers, reached into his jacket and pulled out a sidearm. It wasn't loaded. He thought of it as a joke, a dare, a test of nerves. But the sight of it froze the air solid. The barrel glistened in the rain, a mirror to every eye watching. He pointed it at her head. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the rain seemed to hesitate, suspended in the air like glass shards. The courtyard shrank until it was only the two of them. Him, trembling behind a mask of bravado, and her, motionless, eyes unreadable. She didn't flinch. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. Too quiet. "You should put that down." Something in her tone, something not human, something forged in the black water of places he could never imagine, made his pulse stutter. But pride is louder than fear. "What are you going to do?" Bryce said, forcing a grin. "You're not in the field anymore. You're just a washed-up SEAL-playing teacher." The words were smoke, but beneath them was fire. Alina could feel the weight of every cadet's stare, some amused, some frozen with shock, some wishing they had the courage to stop this. But courage and discipline are not the same thing. In the distance, thunder rolled, a low growl across the sky. She took one step forward. The movement was so subtle that Bryce didn't even realize how close she was until her reflection filled his pupils. Her eyes were not angry, they were calm, and that calmness was terrifying. Her hand moved once. No wasted motion, no warning. The gun was no longer in his grip. His arm twisted, his knees buckled, and before he could process the pain, his face was pressed against the cold concrete. The weapon lay on the ground between them, harmless and wet. The other cadets stumbled back, murmurs spreading like wildfire. She knelt beside him, voice still steady. "You don't point a weapon at anyone," she said softly. "Not unless you're ready to lose everything." Bryce didn't speak. His cheek burned against the pavement, and the realization sank in, not fear, but humiliation. And yet, behind that, something else stirred. Respect, confusion, the kind that comes when a lesson cuts deep enough to scar. She stood, rain tracing lines down her jaw. For a moment, she seemed distant, like her mind wasn't in this courtyard, but back somewhere far darker, somewhere that smelled of blood and iron. When she turned to the others, her words were measured. In the field, hesitation kills. Arrogance kills faster. You train for precision, but you live by discipline. Remember that. No one dared to respond. Thunder cracked again, but this time it wasn't frightening. It was cleansing. The sky broke open, rain washing across their boots, over the discarded gun, over everything that had just happened. As she walked away, a whisper rippled through the line. Some called her cold, some called her unshakable. But the truth was simpler and far more haunting. Commander Alina Drake wasn't teaching them how to fight. She was teaching them how to survive what comes after. And as Bryce knelt there, palms trembling. A single thought burned into his mind, a thought that would keep him awake for nights to come. He had looked into the eyes of someone who had already died once and come back knowing exactly what it cost. He would never forget that lesson. The next morning, Fort Grayson was quieter than usual. The parade grounds, normally alive with the cadence of boots and barked orders, felt hollow, stripped of their rhythm. The cadets avoided the courtyard where it had happened. Their voices subdued, their laughter gone. Even the flag above the mess hall hung heavy, soaked in dew and silence. Commander Alina Drake's name was on everyone's lips, though few dared to speak it aloud. Rumors spread like wildfire in the dormitories. Some said she'd been special operations. Others whispered she'd killed men with her bare hands. A few claimed she was part of a classified rescue mission gone wrong. But no one knew the truth, and that uncertainty made her legend grow faster than any fact ever could. Bryce Keller hadn't shown up for morning drills. His roommate said he hadn't slept. His hands still shook when he tried to eat, and his mind replayed the moment over and over. The weight of the gun, her eyes, that impossible calm. He couldn't explain it, but in those few seconds something inside him had cracked open. What had started as defiance now festered as shame. By mid-morning, Alina stood in front of the review board. 3 officers seated beneath a faded portrait of the Academy's founder. Their faces were rigid, unreadable. Colonel Reeves, the head of training, adjusted his glasses and looked at her file. "Commander Drake," he said slowly, "a report has been filed about an incident with Cadet Keller. He claims excessive force." Alina stood at ease, hands clasped behind her back. Her uniform was crisp, her face expressionless. "Cadet Keller pointed a firearm at me during inspection. I neutralized the threat. No further harm was done." The colonel raised an eyebrow. "You disarmed him without injury?" "Yes, sir." "And what prompted this escalation?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Disrespect, sir. Lack of discipline." There was a pause, a long one. Reeves leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You've been here 3 weeks, Commander. You've already restructured the endurance program, rewritten the engagement code, and now this. Some of my officers think your methods are unconventional." Alina's eyes flickered toward the window, where rain still drummed against the glass. "War is unconventional, sir. The enemy doesn't hand you rulebooks." For a moment, Reeves said nothing. He studied her as though trying to peer through her skin, to see the ghost she carried inside. Then, quietly, "I read your record. Operation Meridian, 2 hostages recovered. 4 operatives lost. Classified details redacted." Her breath caught, just slightly, but she held her ground. Reeves continued, "You don't talk about it. You don't talk about much of anything. But I'll tell you this. These cadets aren't soldiers yet. They're kids trying to become men. Don't break them before they learn how to stand." She met his gaze evenly. "With respect, sir, the world they're walking into won't care if they're broken." The colonel's silence stretched like a wire between them, taut and dangerous. Then, with a sigh, he nodded toward the door. "Dismissed, Commander." She saluted, turned, and left the room. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, smelling faintly of gun oil and wet concrete. The courtyard was empty, except for one figure waiting by the flagpole. Bryce. He stood awkwardly, cap in hand, face pale. As she approached, he straightened, though his voice trembled. "Commander, I wanted to apologize." She stopped a few feet away, studying him. He looked smaller now, his arrogance stripped bare, replaced by something fragile and real. "You don't owe me an apology," she said softly. "You owe one to yourself. You forgot what that weapon means." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't think. I just wanted to prove that you weren't afraid." She finished for him. He hesitated. Yes, her eyes softened, but her tone didn't. "Fear isn't weakness, Keller. It's awareness. The ones who claim they don't feel it are the ones who die first." He looked down. "Were you ever afraid?" For a moment, she didn't answer. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung heavy above them, a ceiling of gray. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than he'd ever heard it. "Every day. The difference is, I learned how to listen to it. He didn't understand. Not fully. But something in her eyes told him that the fear she spoke of wasn't ordinary. It wasn't about bullets or pain. It was about the silence that follows both. That night, long after lights out, Keller sat by the window of his dorm, watching the rain return. Across the campus, he could see the faint glow from Alina's quarters. He imagined her there, sitting in that same silence she had carried from her past, staring into the dark like it was an old friend. He wondered what she had seen, what she had done, what it had cost her to be so calm under a gun's barrel. And for the first time in his life, Bryce Keller didn't want to be fearless. He wanted to be disciplined. He wanted to understand what it truly meant to serve. But he didn't know that understanding would come sooner than he ever expected. Because fate was about to test Commander Alina Drake again. And this time, it wouldn't be a cadet with a training weapon. It would be something far more dangerous. Something that would force every man at Fort Grayson to see who she truly was beneath the uniform. The wind had changed overnight. It carried a new scent, metal, oil, and something faintly electric, like the air before a storm. By dawn, Fort Grayson's calm had curdled into tension. Alina could feel it before anyone spoke a word. Years of training had taught her that danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hummed quietly, waiting for someone attuned enough to notice. When she stepped out of her quarters, she saw the vehicles first. 3 unmarked SUVs parked near the command building, engines still ticking, their matte black finish absorbing the early light. Men in grey suits stood nearby, speaking in clipped tones to Colonel Reeves. Military intelligence, not the kind that came for inspections, the kind that came for ghosts. She approached with measured steps, her presence cutting through the damp air. Reeves turned, his expression unreadable. "Commander Drake," he said, voice lower than usual, "we have visitors. They're requesting your expertise." Her eyes flicked toward the men. "Requesting," she repeated. It wasn't a question. One of the agents stepped forward, badge glinting. "Commander Drake, we're with Naval Intelligence. There's been an incident 2 miles east of here. Unauthorized breach at the munitions depot. 3 guards down. 1 critical. We have reason to believe the suspects are former servicemen." The pause that followed carried weight. Alina's posture didn't change, but her heartbeat slowed, trained instinct taking over. "And what does that have to do with me?" The agent hesitated. "One of them is using the call sign Spectre." The name hit like a bullet to the chest. The courtyard seemed to shrink, the cold slicing deeper. Spectre. That was no random alias. That was the code name of someone she'd known long ago. Someone she'd buried in the dark corners of her past. Reeves noticed the flicker in her expression. "You know him?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I thought he was dead." Minutes later, she was in a Humvee, the rain blurring the windshield as the base shrank behind them. Every bump in the dirt road brought back flashes. Dust, fire, voices screaming across radio static. Operation Meridian, the mission that had ended her field career and left 4 names carved into her memory like epitaphs. Spectre had been one of them. Now he was alive. The convoy stopped at the edge of the depot. A fenced perimeter twisted open like a wound. Smoke rose from the loading bay, black and acrid. The metallic tang of burned ammunition hung thick in the air. Bodies had already been removed, but blood still streaked the gravel. She moved through the wreckage with the grace of someone who had spent half her life walking through aftermaths. The agents followed, murmuring theories, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes caught details they missed: the direction of tire tracks, the spacing of footprints, the deliberate absence of shell casings. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. This wasn't a robbery, she said, kneeling beside a shattered crate. It was an extraction, controlled, precise. "Extraction of what?" one agent asked. "Data drives, explosives, maybe both." She paused, gloved fingers brushing a faint imprint on the ground. A combat boot with a distinctive tread. She knew that pattern. She'd seen it once before, in the mud of a foreign desert, on the feet of a man she'd trusted with her life. The world around her faded until all she could hear was the rain. Her pulse drummed in her ears. He's sending a message. What kind of message? She stood, meeting the agent's gaze. "The kind meant for me." Back at the academy, news traveled fast. Whispers rippled through the halls. Something about an attack, something about Commander Drake being called to the scene. Bryce overheard it during drills. The memory of that gun and the quiet power in her eyes came flooding back. Whatever was happening, it wasn't ordinary. That evening, Alina returned, her uniform streaked with mud and ash. She looked unchanged on the surface, but something in her eyes had shifted, a shadow deeper, older. Reeves was waiting for her outside the office. "You found something," he said. "Someone," she corrected. "Spectre." Reeves frowned. "From Meridian," she nodded once. "He's alive, And he's not working alone." He exhaled, shoulders heavy. "Do you think he's coming here?" Her silence was answer enough. That night, the wind picked up, howling through the corridors. The cadets slept uneasily, unaware that their academy, safe, orderly, protected, had just become a potential target. Alina sat alone in her quarters, the glow from a single lamp tracing the lines on her face. On the table before her lay an old photograph, edges curled and faded. 6 faces in uniform smiling in desert heat, hers among them, his beside hers, Spectre. The man who had saved her life once. The man she had left behind in the wreckage of Meridian. Now he was back, and she knew men like him didn't return for closure. They returned for retribution. She closed her eyes and whispered to the empty room, "You shouldn't have come back." Outside, the storm gathered again. Low thunder rumbling across the horizon. In a few hours, Fort Grayson would awaken to drills, salutes, and the illusion of safety. But by nightfall, the illusion would shatter, because the ghosts of Alina Drake's past were already on their way. The storm came before dawn. Not a thunderstorm, something quieter, more deliberate, the kind of storm born of men with purpose. The first warning was the blackout. One moment, Fort Grayson was glowing with the sterile light of security lamps. The next, darkness swallowed the campus whole. Inside her quarters, Commander Alina Drake was already awake. She had felt the shift hours ago, the subtle static in the air, the unnatural silence that pressed against the windows. When the power died, she didn't move at first, she just listened. The rain had stopped. The wind had stopped. The wind had stopped. The world had gone still. Then she heard it, a low mechanical whine, too faint for anyone without her training to notice. Drones, recon class, military grade but modified. They were scanning the perimeter, just beyond the walls. Alina rose, pulling on her jacket and sidearm in one fluid motion. Her movements were automatic, almost ritualistic. She stepped into the hallway, where emergency lights flickered weakly, painting everything in red. The academy's security alarm hadn't gone off. Whoever was out there knew exactly how to silence it. She moved swiftly toward the command wing, her boots soundless on the floor. When she turned the corner, she almost collided with Bryce Keller. He was in uniform, breathless, eyes wide. "Ma'am," the lights, "what's happening?" Her answer was a whisper. "An attack." His blood ran cold. From who? She didn't answer. She just kept moving, and he followed. They reached the armory, where a handful of cadets had already gathered, confusion mixing with fear. "Commander," said one of them, voice shaking, "we thought it was a drill." "It's not," she replied. Her voice cut through the chaos like steel. "Listen to me carefully. This is not training. You will do exactly as I say. No questions, no hesitation." They straightened instinctively, something ancient and primal in her tone awakening their discipline. Outside, the first explosion ripped through the night, a controlled blast at the south fence line. The sound was deep and distant, but its message was unmistakable. The storm had arrived. The academy erupted into chaos. Sirens finally screaming, boots pounding across concrete, cadets shouting in confusion. Alina stood perfectly still for a moment, absorbing the rhythm of it all. The noise, the movement, the fear. Then she turned to Bryce. "Get them to the mess hall. Reinforce the doors. Serve de nuit. Use the kitchen's steel counters to block the windows. Stay out of sight." "What about you?" he asked. She checked her weapon. "I'm going to greet our guests." The night outside was black and wet, every surface reflecting fragments of red from the emergency lights. Smoke from the fence fire drifted low, mixing with mist. Alina crouched behind a sandbag wall near the courtyard and saw them. 5 figures moving through the fog, ghost-like, tactical gear, silenced rifles, formation perfect, and leading them was the silhouette she recognized instantly. Even after all these years, his gait was unmistakable, calm, predatory, efficient. Spectre. He moved like he still belonged to the shadows that had made them both. Alina steadied her breath. The cold metal of the pistol against her palm was grounding. She counted their steps, the timing of their turns, the glint of optics in the dark. When they crossed the open space, she fired once. Clean, sharp, deliberate. The late man dropped before he even realized it. The rest scattered, returning fire toward her position. Bullets tore through sandbags, sending splinters of stone and soil into the air. Alina rolled left, used the cover of smoke to reposition. Years of training flooded back, muscle memory forged in fire and blood. From the radio clip to her shoulder came static, then a young voice. "Commander, they're breaching the west gate." It was Bryce. She pressed the transmitter. "Fall back to the east corridor. Don't engage unless you have to." "But ma'am, do it, Keller." The silence that followed told her he had obeyed. Through the haze, a shadow emerged. Spectre. He moved closer now, weapon lowered, like a wolf approaching its prey with respect. His voice carried over the wind, calm and eerily familiar. "Still as precise as ever, Drake. You haven't lost your touch." She stayed hidden behind the debris, her heartbeat steady. "You're trespassing," she said evenly. He chuckled, a sound that hadn't changed. "Funny. I thought this place was yours to protect. That's why I'm here. Then you should have knocked." "I did." His tone darkened. "You just shot the man who opened the door." The old rhythm between them returned, taunt and restraint, predator and predator. "What do you want, Spectre?" she asked. "What's mine?" he replied. "The files from Meridian, they're here, locked under your name." Her jaw tightened. "Those files were sealed for a reason. So were we," he said. "Buried alive under lies." A flash of movement, he fired, grazing her shoulder. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, but she stayed focused, ducking behind the wall. The past had come for her, not as memory this time, but as consequence. Inside the academy, Bryce and the other cadets were barricading the mess hall, every clang of metal echoing like a heartbeat. He could hear gunfire outside now, real, lethal gunfire. And for the first time, he understood what she had meant when she said the world wouldn't care if they were broken. Outside, Alina reloaded, blood soaking through her sleeve. She could hear footsteps, Spectre closing in. She whispered to herself, "You should have stayed dead." Then she stepped into the open, and the storm swallowed them both. The courtyard was a graveyard of smoke and fire. Flares burned weakly in puddles, the air thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and wet stone. Every breath stung like iron. Commander Alina Drake moved through it like a ghost, silent, deliberate, bleeding but unbowed. Her left arm hung heavy from the graze, but her eyes were sharper than the blade she kept holstered at her thigh. Spectre was close. She could feel him before she saw him. The faint crunch of boots on gravel, the steady rhythm of a man who never rushed because he never needed to. He was still the same, precise, patient, unflinching, still walking through hell like it's home. His voice came through the haze, low and clear. Alina stopped. "You built the hell," she said, her tone flat. He stepped into view, no helmet, no insignia. His face was older, harder, marked by the years she thought had buried him. The rain traced lines through the soot on his skin. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, not raised. He didn't need it. This wasn't about bullets anymore. "You know why I'm here," Spectre said. "You know what they did to us." She met his gaze, unflinching. "They didn't do this," she said. "You did. Whatever's left of you died with the others that night." He tilted his head slightly. "You think I died because of Meridian?" "No. Meridian was a mirror, Alina. It showed us who we really were. You following orders until they killed us. Me seeing the truth too late. The memories came flooding back before she could stop them. The heat, the sand, the deafening silence after the explosion. The hostages already gone, the mission compromised. Spectre disappearing into smoke, presumed dead. 4 of their own left behind. The command had covered it up. She had obeyed. "You disobeyed orders," she said, her voice breaking through the fog. "You compromised the team. I saved you, he shot back, and they erased me for it. The truth sat between them like a loaded weapon, one neither of them could put down. She raised her pistol, but he didn't flinch. If you pull that trigger, he said softly, you'll just prove what they made you. A soldier who follows orders, no matter who's in the crosshairs. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from memory. He was right about one thing. Meridian had changed her. She had buried herself under obedience, under silence, under the illusion that discipline could erase guilt. But guilt doesn't vanish. It waits. Before she could speak, the distant crack of gunfire echoed from the west wing. She froze. The cadets. Spectre saw her glance and smiled faintly. Ah, the next generation. You think you can teach them honor in a world built on betrayal. You stay away from them, she hissed. They're already in it, he said. The system you serve will feed them to the same machine that fed us. I'm just here to show them the truth. He turned as if to leave, and that was his mistake. Alina lunged forward, slamming into him with the force of years of restraint breaking loose. They hit the ground hard, rolling through mud and smoke. His rifle skittered away, landing in a puddle with a hiss. He was strong, still strong, but so was she. Their struggle wasn't elegant. It was raw, desperate, two ghosts clawing for control of the same past. She struck first elbow to his jaw. He countered, sweeping her leg. They crashed into a sandbag wall, breath ragged. I didn't come to fight you, he grunted, pinning her arm. Then stop, she rasped. I can't. The words carried more pain than defiance. He pressed harder, forcing her wrist down. But she twisted, using his momentum, and in one brutal motion reversed their positions. Her knee pinned his chest. The muzzle of her gun pressed against his throat. For a long, terrible second, neither of them moved. Rain pattered softly on the barrel. Do it, he whispered. Finish what Meridian started. Her finger hovered on the trigger, trembling. His eyes were the same eyes that had once watched her back in the field. Steady, loyal, human. She saw not an enemy, but a reflection. I can't, she said finally. Then you're still there, soldier. She leaned closer, voice cutting through the storm. No, I'm just done fighting ghosts. He stared up at her, disbelief flickering into something like peace. For the first time he smiled, a sad, fractured thing. You always were the better one, he murmured. Then movement behind him caught her eye. One of his men, emerging from the smoke, weapon raised. Without thinking, she threw herself sideways, firing once. The man dropped. Spectre stared at her, shock and rage warring in his face. You shouldn't have done that, he said. She got to her feet, weapons still trained on him. Neither should you. In the distance, the academy lights flickered back to life. Emergency generators kicking in. The courtyard flooded with pale light, revealing the wreckage in full. Bodies, smoke, fire, silence. Spectre rose slowly, blood trickling from a cut on his temple. This isn't over, he said. Truth never stays buried. No, Alina said quietly. But it doesn't have to burn everything in its path. They stood there, two soldiers carved from the same war, both broken by the same command, until the sound of approaching boots and shouted orders filled the air. Military police swarmed in, weapons drawn. Spectre didn't resist when they surrounded him. He looked at her one last time, a question in his eyes that neither of them could answer. As they took him away, Alina stood alone in the rain, surrounded by the ghosts of her past and the silence of her choices. She looked down at her trembling hands. They weren't steady anymore. Maybe they never had been. Somewhere deep inside, the truth settled like a weight she could finally carry. She had won nothing. She had simply survived. But for the cadets inside, those who had seen the world's cruelty for the first time tonight, that survival was everything. They would learn not just how to fight, but why. That perhaps was enough. Dawn crept over Fort Grayson like an exhausted sigh. Smoke drifted above the shattered courtyard, curling into the pale light of morning. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving puddles that reflected the slow march of soldiers and medics moving between bodies, debris, and silence. The academy, once the model of precision and discipline, now looked like a battlefield. Commander Alina Drake stood at the edge of it all, her uniform stained with blood and ash. A medic had wrapped her shoulder, but she'd waved off further treatment. pain was something she understood. It reminded her she was still here. Colonel Reeves approached quietly, stepping over a fallen helmet. His face was drawn, older somehow. "They've taken Spectre into custody," he said. "He's refusing to speak. His men are dead." Alina didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the distant tree line, where dawn burned orange behind the smoke. Reeves studied her. "I read the preliminary report. You could have killed him. Why didn't you?" She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Because I already did," she said. "A long time ago." He frowned. "You'll have to explain that." Her eyes softened, not with weakness, but with memory. "Spectre died on Meridian. The man I knew, the one who fought beside me, who believed we were making a difference, he died there. Whatever's left is what happens when you survive something you shouldn't." Reeves let the silence linger. "Command will want answers. They'll want someone to blame. I know," she said. And she looked back toward the courtyard where cadets were helping one another, carrying stretchers, sweeping debris, bandaging wounds. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Let them. I can take it." Reeves nodded slowly, then walked away. He knew better than to argue. As the sun climbed, the academy began to stir back to life. Generators rumbled, communication lines flickered on, and the long process of repair began. Among the cadets, whispers spread of what had happened. The attack, the fight, the woman who stood her ground against ghosts from another war. To them, she was more than a commander now. She was proof that legends bled and still stood. By noon, Alina stood alone in the mess hall. The room smelled faintly of gun oil and coffee. Tables were overturned, glass shattered, walls scarred with bullet marks. She began to clean, slowly, methodically, because order, even small order, was something worth reclaiming. She didn't hear Bryce enter at first. His arm was in a sling, a cut above his eyebrow. He hesitated before speaking. "They said you saved us." She looked up from the broken glass. "No," she said quietly. "You saved yourselves." He stepped closer. "That man Spectre, he knew you." She set down the rag. "Yes." "What was he?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "A soldier who forgot why he started." Bryce nodded, though he didn't fully understand. "Will they shut the academy down?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they'll just patch the walls and pretend this never happened. That's what they do." He hesitated, then said, "I saw what you did out there, how you moved, how you didn't flinch. I didn't know someone could be that calm." Her voice softened. "It's not calm, Keller, it's control. And it comes from knowing exactly what you can lose." He studied her for a long moment. "You think we'll ever be ready for that?" Alina smiled faintly. "Just a trace. If I do my job right, you won't have to be." He wanted to ask more. To ask about Meridian, about the ghosts that haunted her eyes. But something told him she wouldn't answer. Some stories weren't meant to be spoken. They were meant to be carried. As he turned to leave, she said, "Keller." He stopped. "Don't let what happened last night make you harder," she said. "Let it make you wiser. Fear keeps you alive. Discipline keeps you human." He nodded once, the words settling in his chest, like a brand he wouldn't forget. When he was gone, she walked to the window. Outside, the cadets were training again. Hesitant at first, their movements uneven, but growing steadier. She watched them like a ghost might watch the living. Part pride, part sorrow. Later that afternoon, the convoy from Naval Intelligence returned. 2 agents approached her with sealed folders and clipped words. She didn't ask what they contained. She already knew. Orders, reviews, statements, the paperwork of war that pretends to be peace. One of them said, "Commander Drake, you're to report to headquarters within 72 hours for debriefing." She nodded. "Understood. Until then, you're relieved of duty." She didn't argue. When they left, she walked back toward her quarters, each step heavier than the last. Inside, she found the same old photograph on her desk, the 6 faces from Meridian. She touched the image lightly, tracing the ghost of Spectre's grin. "Goodbye, brother," she whispered. Outside, the cadets began their afternoon drill. Their voices carried through the open window, steady, disciplined, alive. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe without the weight of command pressing on her chest. She sat down, closed her eyes, and listened to the rhythm of boots on concrete. The same rhythm that had once led her through war now sounded like a heartbeat of something purer. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't peace, but it was purpose, and that was enough. As the sun dipped low, the flag at Fort Grayson caught the light again, fluttering in the golden haze. Beneath it, Alina Drake. Once a weapon, now a teacher, stood silent, the wind tugging at her sleeve. The cadets watching from afar didn't see the exhaustion in her eyes or the ghosts in her silence. They saw strength, they saw calm. They saw the kind of courage that doesn't roar but endures. And if they listened closely, they could almost hear the lesson she had carved into the bones of the academy itself. Never point a weapon at someone who's already survived their own war, because one day, that person might be the only reason you live long enough to fight your own. And that was the truth. No book, no briefing, no uniform could ever teach.